So you need no introduction to Prasad. I'm Joanne Morris. I'm from the Stockholm Environment Institute, across campus on the other side in the Environment Building. And we want to present to you here our reflections and learnings from a project that I just did with Prasad as a YASI discipline hopping fellowship. I'm a sustainability scientist and I wanted to learn more about games, to see about translating the research that we've been doing in a project I've been working on about urban treescapes, and build on Prasad's Birds in the City board game as the basis for that. So can we use his concept to then make a game that for players to step into the shoes of a treescape manager for a while and negotiate how to design and manage a treescape for a better treescape in the future. So, brilliant, thank you. So we'll go over where the game came from, what it is, and a bit about our design process, and then walk you through some of the key things that we learned through design, what we had to change in the game design and what we learned from that. So where does it come from? Well, as I was saying, urban treescapes are really important and they hold a lot of social and cultural value that doesn't make it into decision making. So they're more than just a carbon sink. They're more than just meeting national and local targets for tree planting, for net zero, or for biodiversity. And so I've been part of the Branching Out project, one of a suite of programs about the future of UK treescapes. And we worked with communities in urban areas to understand the diverse ways that they value trees, and the people that we worked with could tell us a lot about how they value trees and what they want to see in the future, developing visions for the future treescape. But they struggle to necessarily then see, how do we go from today with financial constraints, et cetera, into the future? So they know that they want health and well-being, they know that they want tree-lined streets, but how do we get there? So could we develop a game as a boundary object that allows players to experiment with changing the treescape of today in a neutral space, where people with different interests can come and explore how to get there in a neutral setting, and they can negotiate competing agendas that way. And so our game design came about, starting with a design brief, which is to design a game where players experience how to develop and maintain a treescape in an urban environment across seasons and into the future. And with these specifications, we tried to represent or reflect the complexity of real life, but in a fun way, but with enough agency to actually be or see what it's like to be a treescape manager. And very briefly, you can have a look at the slide afterwards, but the core elements that from the research that we felt that we wanted to reflect in the game are that you have to choose what to plant and where to plant it for different reasons. Then you need to actually make sure your trees survive, that they go from small to medium to large, and that there's things that you do and that the tree characteristics themselves do to keep them alive. There's events it needs resources to do that, and there are constraints and opportunities. Events happen all the time that can threaten or support tree growth. They might be human, they might be otherwise, and then we come back to competing agendas and things like that. So I'll hand over to Prasad to talk about the design process.
Thank you, Joanne. And so we decided to make a game. We first identified our primary audience as the citizens of York, anybody who's in high school or adult who lives in York, but we also identified a secondary audience being stakeholders, working with, say, city council or any other kind of organizations who might be interested in using this game as a part of maybe workshops or facilitated setups. Then we looked at, we used the transformational game design framework and identified our player transformation. The primary one was to help players learn one, what are appropriate trees to be planted at appropriate places? So as Joanne was mentioning in the previous slide. And we also had some secondary player transformations. Together, we decided or sort of articulated our design value to make it a collaborative game, because this is an action where we wanted people to come together, make these decisions together, and let this game to have multiple ways to win. There is no one right answer as such. It's more about like trying out different things and figuring that out together. So something that will include different degrees of winning. And yeah, we designed the game through lots of playtesting, sort of iterative playtests. Initially, they were just between us with like a prototype like that, and then with our friends and colleagues. And ultimately, we also did 2 play sessions as a part of Urban Tree Festival. This is how the game looks like. So this is Urban Laboratory. As you can see, the game is based on the map of York, which you see in the center. It's divided into 5 different zones. And if you see some color coding over there, so each color represents a different habitat that the city of York offers. In the game, we also have 8 different species of trees, and each of those trees have like 5 different attributes or characteristics. When you play this game, it's a collaborative game. You take on a role of one of the player role cards over there. So you could be an urban planner, or you can be a youth climate activist. And based on the role that you pick, you get a set of goals for yourself, and also a common goal for all of you to make York become a certain kind of city with respect to its treescape. When you play, because it's a game about trees, so you get to plant trees and you get to take care of trees. So you can plant any of these species that you have here, and you can take care of them by using those seasonal care tokens, which include nurturing a tree, maintaining a tree, and also spreading awareness about trees. In the game, some events happen. Those are the event cards on the side, which are based on some events that have happened in and around York, and they have affected trees in a positive and maybe sometimes negative way. So all of that comes together, and you play the game over about 4 to 5 rounds, and we have kind of a time jump happening there. You play for year 0, year 3, year 5, year 10, when you can observe a tree grow significantly, because otherwise trees are slower than humans when it comes to growing. Of course, I must give a big shout out to Caroline Berg, who helped us with bringing the game that we were designing to this, how it looks on the screen, making it alive. So, as Joanne mentioned in the beginning, why we are here is to, after giving you all that context, sharing our learning. So it was a really cool and great collaboration to do, and what we found out or what we learned during this process is what we are presenting now. We hope that it will be helpful for all of you also to consider when you're designing applied games, or just to discuss that between yourself or with us. So we have like 3 key learnings. First one being, how do you decide when you're making an applied game, what goes into the game? Secondly, how do we motivate and support decision making among players? And thirdly, how to encourage imagination and storytelling going beyond the structured aspect of game. So let's look at the first learning. How to decide what goes in the game. So between us, we started with this another applied game design framework called Triadic Game Design, in which it first asks you to identify your space of reality. So deciding what all is going to go in the game. In our case, it was the city level map of York, certain tree characteristics, and a tree life cycle across a certain time span. But on top of that, then we looked at this space of reality through 2 lenses. One was the player transformation lens, and the second one was the fun or the playfulness lens. So every aspect that we had, the learning contents that we had gathered within our space of reality, we looked through these 2 lenses, and wherever we found something which is aligning with the player transformation and is fun, we kept it. If it was not aligning, then we prioritized the learning content that was more like intrinsically playful. If it wasn't so, then sometimes we modified it, refined it, or sometimes we just chose not to include it in the game. So I'll give you some examples of that. I think I just talked too much theoretically. So one example of just looking at the playfulness within learning content is the map of York. So we got this data from the GIS information about York, like how the treescape is in York and how it's spread across different habitats. And also just geographically, if you see, York has this ring road going around it and certain streets that go through it. And it just very easily gave us a structure to create a game board, which has these sectors, like different zones, and then the habitats within which players can play. So we balanced sort of like an accuracy with the actual map, but at the same time abstracted it to make it a bit fun, enjoyable. But it was just like an easy translation of what was there into what the game was. An example of like refining learning content is our tree guide. So when Joanne and I started deciding what trees go into the game without having any bias about what's our favorite tree, we came up with 11 tree species and with like a very broad range of attributes. Out of that, like from there, we arrived at these final 8 tree species with 5 distinct functional attributes. So we shortlisted attributes which are about the functions that a tree does. So for instance, through its canopy, it gives shade, or through timber, you can get some economic resources through the trees, or climate resilience, so it can stay like withhold, say, strong winds or even flooding. So we kept that while we removed attributes which were not functional. So for instance, pollen is something that all trees produce, but instead of putting it in the tree guide and making the game quite complex for players to figure out, we rather turned it into a rule. We said that if you plant certain number of trees which produce pollen in a particular zone, then that's going to be inhabitable for the citizens. So try not to do that. So instead of making that attribute as a part of the tree guide, we turned it into a rule. An example of modifying the learning content is the timeline that we have. Again, all of you must be aware that we go through 4 different seasons, and trees behave differently in different seasons. But when we had 4 seasons in the game was becoming too long, it was becoming too repetitive, so we decided to just group them for a quicker and non-repetitive gameplay, like a very easy and a quick example of how probably we need to modify learning content at times. Moving on to the second learning. Yeah.
So the second challenge was how to motivate decision-making, because that's what the game's all about, be a treescape manager. And again, it was about going back to the essential content, and the examples here are really what we learned here is how to strip back even more what I thought was the core elements, and to really pull out what is the bare minimum that you need to be able to play, while still keeping it understandable, reducing the cognitive load for the people learning, because it's a huge amount that I wanted to incorporate into the game. So, for example, I went in, and obviously you need money, and so we put in a currency, because trees are costly and tree care is costly, but it was just too much. It was an additional game element, and it was enough to just say that there are resources and that you have a certain amount of actions that you can take, and you have to decide what to do with those actions. And then the currency is kind of, it distracts, and so you can instead go straight to what is it that are the resources that you need to make decisions about, and that is then leads you to the goals which we've given players to help them. So obviously we'd like people to make their own decisions, but we've given them some goals to start with, and those come from the branching out project, goals and visions, and that then is the motivation and a broader understanding of what resource is. And the second example is in the tree care actions. We first had very detailed description and set of tree care actions, and it was so much detail as well as everything else that people just left them to the side. And for me, it was really, really important that that is part of the game and part of the decision-making process. And so we stripped that right back. What is the very, very bare minimum of tree care that we can play with? And so we ended up with just 3, and actually it's just 2 types of tree care, because it's either looking after the tree health, but that's different in summer and winter, so then you've got a different one in the 2 seasons, and protecting the tree, whether that's by fencing, physical protection, or mental awareness, knowledge protection. And to then motivate that and to guide players to actually use those, it comes in the form of the consequences in the events. So using those tree care actions or not has a consequence. If you don't protect it by raising awareness, then vandals can come and take down your trees and you lose trees, and it's terrible. but then also supporting that in the roles that people have and the goals that they have as part of those roles.
Cool. And yeah, we just have about a minute left, but yeah, that's the last learning from our side, that as Turek was mentioning in his talk, the games are really structured when we talk about like games as structured play. But then how do we encourage imagination and storytelling through something which is so structured? And we found that using elements like player role cards was quite helpful, which some players who were quite experts with trees were able to customize for themselves, add their own details about trees while they play the game. So it became sort of flexible level of detailing. Secondly, as a part of rules, we made it a tiny rule that whatever you're doing in the game, you have to say out aloud what is the action that you're taking. So for instance, if I say that in the game I'm going to plant an oak tree in Heslington outside Troncook Hub, it's because I want some shade to be there because there is no shade when it's too sunny. So those sort of things made the storytelling aspect brought that in, rather, I would say, into the game. And lastly, the game ends with a sort of discussion or reflection with among all the players, and that picture over there shows how typically an end game looks like. And we've seen that players usually then talk about how would it be to be in that York, how would it be to walk on those streets with those kind of trees around you, and that I think feeds into this whole bit of using games to help people envision futures, imagine, and also tell stories, make it more personal for themselves. So that's about it. We'll skip that part. And yeah, if you want to learn more about our collaboration in this project, you can scan that code. And we are hosting 2 game events in York as a part of York Environment Festival in October. So if you're around, do sign up using the other code. Thank you.